All right, we are live in both places. Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. Um, for those of you who don't know me, who I'm new to, I'm Dr. Maisha. I am the founder of the Mind Remapping Company and the host of the Black Mind Garden podcast. And so um, it's always lovely to join you all in the rooms live, and for those of you who will be listening on replay, to be able to share this with you on your favorite podcast platform. So, hello everybody that's joining us here on Instagram, who is joining us live on LinkedIn, and who is joining us live on YouTube and Facebook. Um, so today I was thinking about this topic, naming our trauma and dysfunction as an access to healing. And as someone who grew up as a proud Gen Xer, there were sayings that I grew up with, and you may remember. You may, if you're whether you're a Gen X or whether you're not, culturally speaking, this can be true as well. But there are sayings that, like, what goes on in this house stays in this house. There are sayings like, leave your feelings at the door. There are sayings like, don't put the family business out in the streets. Like, these are all sayings that we grew up with, or I grew up with, I should say. And, in a lot of ways, I can understand the sentiment of that. But what we have come to learn is that there are a lot of of trauma. There's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of dysfunction that tends to get swept under the rug. Now, we can talk about this in the context of family, and this happens at the level of group and the corporate atmosphere as well. And I've actually seen it when working with executive teams, because at the end of the day, people want you to see them at their best, and it makes sense that they would want that. Um, and so what happens is, people will take the traumas, or that take the harm, or take the dysfunction that could be happening in a group or in an organization or in a family, and sometimes sweep it under the rug. And that's extremely harmful, because the person who is affected, well, all people are generally affected, but the person who may be the most impacted, the person who may be on the receiving end of such harm, is made invisible in some ways. All right. And so, you know I I've seen this not only occur in my own family, but I've seen this, in coaching and training in over the last 10 or so years. I've seen this theme come up over and over and over again. So then the question is, how why is this harmful? Well, that's one of the questions. Well, if you think about it, if we are constantly um, going through our lives not addressing the dysfunction, whether it's at the level of individual, and I'm specifically talking about at the level of group here, the level of group, meaning family or in the organization, it doesn't just go away. It's like, if you can imagine, you're stuffing trash in a trash can. You're stuffing trash in a trash can. Now you're stuffing this trash in a trash can, and eventually that trash can gets full. And if you keep stuffing it without addressing it, without looking at it, without taking the trash out, that trash is going to overflow. And when that trash overflows, the people around, and number one, it creates a dirty environment, right? The environment, it becomes dirty. The stench impacts everyone around. But the other part of it is that if the trash continues to pile up, the environment becomes unsafe. So to continue to sweep things under the rug and not address dysfunction or trauma, especially at the level of the group, all it ends up doing is spilling over and affecting not only one's work, but one's relationships, relationships to colleagues, relationships to family. It affects our relationship with ourselves, whether you're the one who's being swept under the rug or the one who's doing the sweeping. Because let's be clear, the person doing the sweeping does the sweeping for a reason, right? So oftentimes the person doing the sweeping can get villainized, and true enough, that does cause harm, that sweeping under the rug. However, there's usually an embarrassment or a shame associated with sweeping, the actual act of sweeping under the rug, whether you're sweeping your own stuff under the rug or whether you're sweeping other stuff under the rug. There's a shame associated with it. And where there are negative emotions of guilt and shame, where there are negative emotions of anger, sadness, fear, hurt, guilt, there's usually behind that there's some trauma. And so when we think about what is the access to healing, it may not be the easy road, right? We can read all the books that you want to read. And I think reading books and educating oneself is a great place to start. But when we start to name the dysfunction, then there's an access point to healing. Because if it's not being named, if it's just being stuffed under the rug, you can't see it. It can't be addressed. But when you begin to name it, and not only name it, well, I should say, when you begin to name it, then that's the access to do the next thing, which is to take actions toward the healing of it. And that can look like many different things. So we can speak in the context of family first, and then we're going to speak in the context of organization, because I think this applies in both realms. And I want to be able to have people to be able to juxtapose, because most people have had a connection with family. And there are very many people that are seeing this kind of dysfunction, this dysfunction at the level of the group in their organizations, on their teams. So let's talk family for a minute. You know, what is harmed? What is the word that's in my mind is ruined, but I don't want to use that word. What is impacted when you have things at the level of the family swept under the rug? Well, what I can see has happened in, my own experience with both myself and with people, is it drives a wedge between people. It creates a circumstance of lack of safety, of distance, and with that distance, where there's no connection, where there's isolation, then relationships further are harmed or dissolve even. And so when we look at the power of beginning to name the dysfunction, and not naming it in a way of, because this is important, right? Not naming in the way of you're dysfunctional, because that is harmful as well. Not you're dysfunctional, or you're this, or you're that. Like that is not the way that we name. But to really acknowledge, okay, what is the dynamic going on here? Like, we tend to do this over and over again. We're going through these cycles over and over again. And this is the impact of that. Like, I don't feel safe to talk to you. That's why I haven't called you as much. That's why, our conversations are so short. That's why I don't come home as often. That's why, all of these things. Like, and I wonder what the impact is on you. Like, what is it in our relationship that this dynamic is doing to you? And really listening, right? That's a way to name. Then you have an access point. Okay, now what is it that we want? What is it that we want, right? First, you got to get what you want. What is the outcome that we want? Because if you don't know what the outcome you want is, then you don't know the action to take. So the outcome could be, well, maybe we should complete the relationship. And that's a real possible outcome. I mean, people don't think of that. People feel like many people think, oh, we got to fix it. We got to fix it. We have to repair. And sometimes there is no repair. Sometimes we must go our separate ways now. And that's okay. Relationships are around for reasons, seasons in our lifetime. Sometimes relationships complete. Sometimes relationships come into our life for a reason. And when that reason or when that lesson is learned, it's time to move to the next thing. So sometimes that conversation is, we're not good for each other, or this is an unhealthy dynamic and I don't see a repair to it. Let's move on. And if that's what you want, then there's the steps to take to that. But and then each person can go about their healing separately, right? So even if the naming results in a split of the relationship, the two people can still heal. They just heal individually on their paths. Now, if there is this circumstance in which, no, I want this relationship to continue, or I want to improve, or I want to deepen, and let's be clear, the relationship doesn't have to be bad for there to be dysfunction and trauma and a desire to heal. So I want to also put that into space. The relationship doesn't have to be bad or wrong or negative. It could just be there's an aspect of a relationship that when it comes up, harm is done. And so when that's identified, and then you identify, well, this is what I want, and each of you feels like that is something that can be done inside of the relationship, repair can happen. And then you take the action. What the action may be therapy, or the action may be that you spend more time together. The action may be you both get a coach. The action may be a number of things to begin to heal and repair. And the action may simultaneously be done together and apart, right? Because when two or more people are carrying around their own traumas and they're interacting with each other, they need that personal healing, but also there may need to be healing inside of the dynamic, like recognizing when that dynamic is arising, so they can be interrupted. And so that can happen at the level of family, or at the level of friendship, at the level of when I say family, sibling, mother, child, mother, grandparent, aunties, uncles, all of the things, right? So now let's map this on, because I imagine you could probably hear in the conversation how this could also map on organizationally. Because if you're on a team, and it may not be as personal, but and it could be, right? If you're on a team and the team is exhibiting dysfunction, but nobody's naming the dysfunction, then all that's happening is there's an impact to productivity, there's an impact to creativity, there's an impact to retention of talent, there's an impact to psychological and emotional safety. There's all of this impact when dysfunction exists, and within a team, at the level of a team, right? And by the way, you can map anything I say for organizations back onto family, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all interconnected, right? So family is an example of a team, and team, executive team, and all the things it can operate inside of this sort of family dynamic. And so when you have this organization, and this organization is exhibiting dysfunction, but they're sweeping it under the rug, it impacts the corporation as a whole. It may impact the team, but that ripples out to the department, which can ripple out to the entire organization. It's production, it's customer satisfaction, it's whatever, it's sales, it's whatever the case may be, it's delivery. And so when in this case, in this type of dynamic, when the people agree that there's dysfunction, and especially the leadership can recognize the dysfunction, naming that, okay, what we're doing is not working. There is some need for maybe some training, or some maybe they're not using the word healing in a corporation, but some repair in terms of communication. There's some need of some fixing of some things in order for us to be able to operate as efficiently and as effectively as a team as possible. The bottom line is, it's a naming of dysfunction. It just sounds different. But when you name that dysfunction, then you can actually take action. So then, of course, the same thing applies. If you're in a team or on an organization or in a classroom, what is it that you want? What is the outcome that you want? And in this case as well, it's a brainstorm. Like, what do we want as outcomes? How do we want to amend this? And what is the potential positive impact that this can have? And how do we know when we have this? And in this case, the organization may hire a consultant or may bring on coaches or may implement trainings so that they can begin to, maybe there's policies that need to be shifted, um, partnerships that need to be formed. And so this is a lot of the work that can be done on the organizational side. But my point is, you know, this conversation um, called leave your feelings at the door, which is impossible because we operate, we are feeling people. Like, that's just what we are, right? We are the people who are human, who we all have emotion, unless you're sociopath. And of course, sociopaths do not feel emotion. That's actually a diagnosis. Um, but if you're human, if you're living the human experience, then you're feeling emotion. And it's normal to feel emotion. So this leave your feelings at the door business, it doesn't really exist. The what goes on in this house stays in this house can be harmful both uh, at the personal level and at the organizational level. It's easy to imagine how this can be harmful at the personal level, when people are hiding very personal traumas. In the organizational level, it may be a little bit more nuanced, because if we're not acknowledging what's going on in the dynamic and the harm that's being done, then and nobody, like, if it's really what goes on in this house stays in this house, then the organization cannot operate outside of its own blind spot. Leaders cannot operate outside of their own blind spot. So even if they do decide they want to fix something, if they're involved by nature, they're going to miss something, which is why it's useful to bring out in an outside view. And I do believe that's the case in family as well. It's like useful to bring an outside view. Now, it may look like professional outside view, or maybe for those who are very spiritual and into um, utilizing church counseling services could be a way, but you have to be careful about that. But like, usually trained professionals are I think the safest to go in both instances, because you can only go so far inside of your own vision, your own mental model, and everybody's mental model is limited based on their own traumas and their own filters. So the question I have for you is, what is being swept under the rug? What is being swept under the rug in your own life? What is being swept under the rug in your relationships? What are we not addressing? What is being swept under the rug in your organizations? What are you not addressing? And what is the impact on that? And it's useful to start naming that and thinking about what is the outcome that you want, and how then will you choose to move forward based on the outcome that you want. So that's the reflection for this week. And I absolutely would love to hear your feedback and what you're experiencing. And you can do that by commenting. I always check the comments after I have completed this live. And you can also do that by reaching out to me directly on the messenger when you see this, if you'd like. And of course, this is the work that I do, helping to create trauma-informed environments, whether it's in the family or whether it's in organizations. And I do a lot of this work with an equity and inclusion lens. And so if this is something that you're thinking, oh, maybe we want to talk a little bit more about that, then you can go reach out to me directly via the platform. If you're connected on LinkedIn or on Facebook or on Instagram, you can reach out to me directly, or you can go to the website that you see right here on the video. And if you're listening on replay, or if you're listening to the audio, you can go to mindremappingacademy.com, mindremappingacademy.com. And all of this information is always in the show notes. So that if you have more questions and you're thinking, oh, well, maybe this will be a good topic to bring to my organization, my church, my school, my community organization, or support group, then it's something that I'm happy to expand upon with you. So with that, the one last thing I'll ask you to do is, if you're not already following the Black Mind Garden podcast, go take a listen, because this is where a lot of these topics end up on the podcast, as well as if you're here, then you're hearing me come in and do the lives, on most weeks. And but also we do have lovely guests that come on that you can probably see that get promoted, and I have lovely conversations with guests that are really deep topics. We talk about trauma, we talk about empowerment, we talk about topics of parenting. That's one of my favorite things to talk about. You all know that about me by now. If you've been listening and following me, I love talking about parenting. And by the way, just to touch on this whole naming trauma and dysfunction as an access to healing. Naming trauma and dysfunction is also an access to breaking generational cycles, because when you can name it and you can start the healing, then you can actually do something different. I recently reposted on one of my platforms an article that talked about parents apologizing to their children and normalizing parents apologizing to their children. And I grew up in an environment where that wasn't the case. And I think that's very true of a lot of Generation X children, is that we didn't, and I'm sure like even older millennials, we didn't hear our parents apologize. And I've seen a lot of TikToks and memes of how certain culture parent apologizes to their kid, but it doesn't include an actual "I apologize." And over time, that is harmful. And so, when being able to talk about these things in community, being able to talk about these dynamics and these harms in community, helps to really begin to break those cycles, break those generational cycles. And as you know, if you follow me on any platform, or if you're subscribing to the podcast, you know that is one of my big callings, is breaking the generational cycles that are that may have caused harm to us, but have potential to cause harm to future generations. So with that, yes, take a listen to and go subscribe to the Black Mind Garden podcast, where many of these conversations occur. And I would invite you to share this with another person. If this is something that you listen to this topic and you say, you know what, this is something that definitely would benefit a family, a friend, a colleague, then share this with a someone in your life, one or two or three people. And we always like to hear from you. So on the podcast platform, whether it's Spotify, whether it's Stitcher, whether it's Apple Podcasts, we'd love for you to leave a review and let us know what you think of the topics. And so with that, I will bid you adieu and have a wonderful rest of your week, and wonderful rest of your weekend. And I will see you on the next episode. All right. Keep healing and keep being you. Bye now.